Well, hello and welcome to Newscenter. I'm Ashmit Kumar. Now, the Bar Council of India has weighed in on the issue of same-sex marriages. In a resolution, it has urged the Supreme Court to leave the issue squarely in the domain of the Parliament, adding that the legislatures represent the true will of the people. The comments from the Bar Council comes at a time when the Supreme Court is in the midst of hearing pleas seeking legal sanctity for same-sex marriages. Now, the Bar Council said that the marriage has been typically accepted and categorized as a union of a biological man and a biological woman for the twin purposes of procreation and recreation. It added that it would be catastrophic to overhaul something so fundamental through a judicial process. Moreover, the Bar Council, its resolution states that over 99.9% of the people of the country are opposed to the idea of same-sex marriages in a country. Joining me now to take this discussion forward is Sharif Ragnikar, author of Queer Sapien, and Vikram Hegde, Supreme Court advocate. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Ragnikar, let me come to you first. Quick thoughts. The Bar Council of India represents the collective wisdom of the bar, yet it comes out with a statement and making unsubstantiated claims to the effect that 99.9% of the population is opposed to the idea of same-sex marriages. Your quick thoughts.
Well, Ashmit, I think I think the Bar Council should be really embarrassed by what they've stated, because I don't know how they've come to such a percentage. There is nothing for them to back that. And also the other part that they're talking about, this being something for the Parliament to look at, the legislature to look at, because of that being the will of the people. But I think the Bar Council, as you use the word collective wisdom, I wish they have the collective wisdom to know how Parliament functions and how Parliament often actually denies people rights and often also fails to really live up to why and the reasons why they've been elected in those positions. So I don't have faith in the Parliament, and I think that's the case with most of us from the queer community, and that is the reason why we've moved to courts. So their collective wisdom, I think, is incredibly misplaced, and they should be embarrassed by what they've actually said in terms of the way they've also approached the Supreme Court, knowing full well what the role of a constitutional bench is, or of any bench of the Supreme Court, when it comes to fundamental rights. So I think they're just trying to perhaps come under some sort of pressure to make such a statement, because I wouldn't imagine the Bar Council has this sort of wisdom.
Mr. Hegde, same question to you. The Bar Council seems to have chosen its words very carefully and has come out with a very strongly worded message as far as the entire legal community is concerned. What is your take on that? The argument that the Bar Council seems to be putting forth is that the Supreme Court has no business here. The legislature and the will of the public should decide the fate of the issue.
So it's very surprising that the Bar Council is taking such a stance. The petitioners before the Supreme Court are advancing their arguments on the basis of their fundamental rights. And when it comes to these rights, it does not matter that the percentages are not in their favor or are in their favor or not. Let's for a moment assume that yes, 99.9% are against this, and we don't have any basis for that at all. Even if it's only 0.1% of people who are seeking to assert their rights, they are very well entitled to assert those rights. And I don't see why the Supreme Court should shy away from even hearing this case, only because presumably or there might be some sort of opposition to it by the popular will. Apart from that, the Bar Council, as a regulatory body for lawyers and as a body which is elected by lawyers, should, I would assume, have a tilt in favor of a greater role for lawyers and therefore for the court in the public domain on questions like this, on questions of rights like this. When that's the situation, it's a little perplexing that they want to cede the space to the legislation, to the legislature, and they want the court to stay away from these questions. So it's not only outside their ambit, it's also counterproductive to the rights of the lawyers, which they are supposed to look out for.
Sure. So that, of course, is the legal aspect. But Mr. Ragnikar, let me come to you. Borrowing from some of these arguments that were made, the government the submission that they've made before the top court is that this is an urban elitist concept. That phrase has invited a lot of commentary, both in and outside of the courtroom. The Bar Council seems to reflect that motion by arguing that this is, quote-unquote, a social experiment. The demand for same-sex marriages, the Bar Council calls it a, quote-unquote, social experiment engineered by a select few. That is something that even invited comments from the Chief Justice himself, Mr. Ragnikar.
See, I think the Bar Council may not have read all the petitions, and I wouldn't be surprised because this was a statement made also by the people representing the government earlier on. Firstly, there are two petitions. One was from Akai Padmashila, who was thrown out of her home at the age of 15. Whatever she has become as a person in the mainstream has been her own doing, her own will, her own strength. She's definitely not an urban elite person. Similarly, there is Zainab Patel, who's a trans woman. She also was begging on the streets at one point of time in her life to come to a point where she educated herself and got a good job in a KPMG and now works for another multinational company. She definitely was not and is not an urban elite. Similarly, if you go to another petition which hasn't been spoken about very much, which is led by Rituparna Bora, who is an indigenous tribe person from Assam, okay, and that's another petition out there in the courts, which is talking about familial violence, which is talking about chosen family, and looking at marriage from different aspects. In that petition, there are many other signatories from small town India. Go back a little bit more into what has been reported in India when Duti Chand came out. She's from small. She came out, she talked about her partner, and she talked about having the right to marry her partner. Now, people can make all kinds of, statements about the petition and about anyone without really doing enough homework. And it's really sad that when lawyers and when a council like this fails to do basic homework before they speak, they actually diminishing the significance of their own office and of their own position of where they stand as set up. So it's really sad that they're doing themselves more of a service than anything else. And I just want to add one or two more things that when they let's look at the record of the legislature. I think it was the NCP leader who moved a private member bill on expanding the idea of family, same-sex couples and marriage equality. Earlier on, and the previous government was there when Dr. Shashi Tharoor had moved to the courts on reading down 377 bills. They weren't even addressed or even entertained by his own. Of a legislature actually looking at rights of people and fundamental rights, which is why we're at the courts, as Mr. Egg. We have no option,
Sure. We look at the road ahead in terms of the way this battle could turn. The argument that the Bar Council is making is that any decision by the Supreme Court of the petitioners will be treated as being against the Indian culture. As the concept of same-sex marriages, will it be accepted? We saw what happened with the Sabrimala verdict and then the reaction on the ground. We saw what happened in cases such as the judge goes ahead and plants this seed. Will it begin to take root given the popular culture and given sentiments like the ones that have been shared by the Bar Council?
Commenting on which way the decision is likely to go, I would say that so far, the way the hearings have gone on, it would appear that the Supreme Court is taking a very careful route. They have sort of taken the stance right now that they will only be looking at whether same-sex marriages can be brought in within the Special Marriages Act, and they would not at the moment be the question of whether this can be read into personal law. So if it's a question of does Hindu law permit this? Does Muslim law permit this? Or do any of the traditional systems permit this? They are looking simply into the question of does the special marriages already looking at something that already permits something that is untraditional, perhaps an interreligious wedding, perhaps whatever reason the parties don't want to do it in their traditional not in any way impinge upon the cultural system that exists, the traditional system that exists. Now, this is a legal given, and I don't see how it will affect any personal.
Sure. Sure. We're running out of time, Mr. Ragnikar. I'll come to you for the final 30 seconds. There has been silence from opposition leaders. There has been silence from them on this particular issue. Is that something that so much political conversations on this very emotive issue?
Ashmit, I think we as a community, we've seen also celebrities and all kinds. No one was really there when the battle was being fought, not just in the court, but in homes, on the streets, in where who include us in their manifestos to come forth and come on to political debates and talk for us. But the fact of the political system is so sucked into the whole vote bank, sort of prefer to do what is safe. And so we have to fight on our own. Very few political parties that we can rely on or depend on. And that's by the courts. Thankfully, we have courts. From the Chief Justice, from other members of the bench. It does give you heart.
Pick up the matter today. 2 of the 5 judges appear to be indisposed on account of infection with COVID. One on best health and hopes that the hearing resumes in the apex court. But that's all the time that we have for